Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Pennsylvania history, which happened in a rural area. Before we start, please leave a comment telling me where you are and when you heard this story. We want to know where these written accounts come from and when they come in, day or night. In the winter of 1887, the remote valleys of McKean County, Pennsylvania, got a lot more snow than usual. The township of Keating had a small business called the Meridian House among the scattered settlements that dotted the lumber regions. This three-story boarding hotel was a place for loggers, surveyors, and other travelers who needed a place to stay along the rough mountain roads that connected the area to more civilized areas. The building itself looked big and strong against the bare winter landscape. Its dark wood frame had been worn down by years of harsh mountain storms and seasonal flooding from Kettle Creek. According to records from the McKean Historical Society, the Meridian House was built in 1881 on the site of an old lumber camp that had been used during Pennsylvania's logging boom. After a number of accidents, which locals blamed on the unstable geology beneath the site, the original camp was abandoned. The hotel had to do a lot of work on its foundation because modern builders said the subsurface conditions were strange and seemed to change without warning during excavation work. On February 14, 1887, two brothers came to the Meridian House looking for a place to stay. The hotel register, which was found decades later when the McKean County Historical Society was renovating its basement, has the names Cornelius Ashworth and Lysander Ashworth. Both men lived in Philadelphia. Ezekiel Thorne, the owner, wrote in his daily ledger that the brothers asked for rooms on the top floor and specifically asked about access to the attic space for what they called astronomical observations. Thorne's ledger entry, written in his usual neat handwriting, said that the brothers paid for a week's stay in advance with gold coins instead of the more common paper money of the time. The Ashworth brothers acted like they were smart and were both in their 30s. Constable Oadia Pierce put together modern witness accounts that said Cornelius was about 5 feet 10 inches tall, had dark hair, and a well-kept beard. He walked and talked like someone who was used to being in school or at work. Several witnesses said he had a refined Eastern accent that made it sound like he had a lot of formal education. Thorne said that Lysander was the more reserved of the two. He was a little shorter than his brother and had calloused hands and a weathered look that showed he was used to doing hard work. His clothes were neat and respectable, but they showed signs of having traveled a long way through rough terrain. Cornelius had a leather bag with what looked like surveying tools and maps in it. Hotel staff, who saw the brothers' things when they arrived, saw a number of brass instruments that were not like any others, as well as rolled-up papers that looked like they had detailed topographical maps of the area around them. The brothers were doing serious professional work, not just observing or doing amateur science, because the instruments were so precise and well-made. The hotel staff and other guests were especially interested in what Lysander was doing. During their short time with the hotel staff, he didn't say much, but several people later remembered that he kept checking his pocket watch and seemed obsessed with the upper floors of the building. Other guests noticed that Lysander would occasionally leave the dining room during dinner to go outside, supposedly to check the weather, but in reality, he was carefully examining the building's exterior and the surrounding landscape. Accounts from the time say that the brothers had been traveling through the wilderness of Pennsylvania for several weeks, asking about land parcels and mineral rights in the remote areas around the Allegheny National Forest. A letter found in 1962 while tearing down Kemp's General Store in nearby Austin gives us a look at what they were up to during this time. The letter was written to a business partner named J. Cornelius, wrote the letter to Morrison in Philadelphia in his own unique handwriting. He was hopeful about what he called promising developments in the Highland territories. The letter, which is kept in the archives of the Pennsylvania Historical Society, has some interesting parts that suggest what the brothers were really doing in the area. Cornelius wrote, "The geological formations we have found are better than we had hoped. The limestone substrate shows clear signs of extensive natural cavitation, with several access points that could work for our planned operations. People who live nearby don't seem to know how valuable their properties could be, and there are still several parcels available for purchase through intermediary arrangements." Later in the letter, it says that the brothers had been doing systematic surveys of the area for at least 2 months before they got to the Meridian House. It looks like they had set up a network of local contacts who told them about who owned what property, what mining had happened in the past, and geological features that could point to valuable mineral deposits. The letter talks about useful talks with county officials about properties that are available and mentions early agreements with a few landowners who don't know what we really want. The Meridian House was in a strange spot in the local geography that made it perfect for what the brothers seemed to want to do. The building was built in 1881 on the site of a former logging camp. It had an unusually large attic that was used to store the seasonal equipment of different traveling professionals. The building was in a good spot because it was close to several important transportation routes and far enough away from neighbors and traveling authorities that it could do its business without drawing unwanted attention. There were only 4 guest rooms on the 3rd floor of the hotel, numbered 5 through 8. The attic could be reached by a narrow staircase that led to a large open room below the peaked roof. The ceiling of this room sloped down to follow the roof line of the building. The room was about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide. The area usually had old furniture, seasonal supplies, and the occasional storage trunk left behind by guests who didn't come back to get their things. Hotel records show that the Ashworth brothers specifically asked to be able to use this attic space, saying they needed a higher vantage point to take astronomical measurements. Ezekiel Thorne was a little confused by this strange request, but he agreed to let them in for an extra fee. His personal diary, which was found among family papers in 1943, shows that he was impressed by how well the brothers seemed to know scientific procedures and how much they were willing to pay for special accommodations. Temperance Caldwell, the only permanent resident of the hotel, was an elderly woman who worked as both a housekeeper and a cook. She noticed that neither brother showed up for breakfast on the morning of February 15th. This wasn't a big deal right away because many guests had different schedules based on their jobs. But when the Ashworths didn't show up in the afternoon and didn't show up until late at night, Thorne decided to look into their rooms. Temperance Caldwell's own account of that day, which she gave to Constable Pierce a few days later, adds more information about the brothers' last hours at the hotel. She said that on the night of February 14th, she woke up to sounds from the upper floors that she described as rhythmic scraping, like someone moving heavy furniture across wooden floors. The noises had been going on and off all night, along with what she called muffled conversations that were whispered urgently. The brothers were given rooms next to each other on the third floor, numbers 7 and 8. Thorn knocked on both doors and got no answer, so he used his master key to get in. There were no signs of recent occupancy in either room, and the beds were not slept in. The brothers' bags, which held clothes, personal items, and Cornelius's collection of surveying tools, stayed in their rooms. Strangely, both rooms looked like the people who lived there had left in the middle of doing something. There were a lot of papers on the desk in room 7, including what looked like letters to and from different people and groups involved in mining and land development. In room 8, an oil lamp burned low. The small flame suggested that it had been left alone for a few hours, but not put out on purpose. The lamp was placed near a window that looked out over the area, which made it look like it could have been used as a signal device to talk to people who were in other parts of the area.
A hand-drawn map found on Cornelius's desk was the first thing that caught people's attention. The rough sketch showed the hotel's floor plan with amazing accuracy, including exact measurements of each room and exact notes about the thickness of the walls and the placement of structural support beams. The map had a well-done drawing of the attic space above, with specific places marked with symbols that looked like surveying markers used in professional geological assessments. There were notes in the margins of the map that showed specific places in the attic that were marked with symbols that looked like compass bearings and elevation measurements. There were small crosses and numbers next to them in some places, which could have meant distances or depths. There were special markings on the eastern wall of the attic, including what looked like structural diagrams showing the building's foundation and the geological formations underneath it.
Thorn's search took him to the attic, which he could get to by going up the narrow stairs that led to the hallway on the third floor. The wooden steps had new wear patterns that suggested a lot of people had walked on them the night before. There were also small piles of dirt and debris that looked like they had been tracked up from lower levels of the building or from outside. It looked like someone had used professional lock-picking tools to open the attic door, which Thorn usually kept locked. There were small metal filings around the keyhole that showed this. When Thorn entered the attic, he quickly saw that the space had changed a lot since he had last looked at it a few days before. Some pieces of furniture had been moved from their usual places along the walls, making an open work area in the middle of the room. A big trunk that usually held seasonal linens had been moved to serve as a table. On top of it, tools and instruments had been carefully arranged in a systematic way. There were a lot of scuff marks and what looked like tool marks on the wooden floor near the building's eastern wall. Most importantly, a part of the floorboards that was about 3 feet by 4 feet had been partially pried up, showing the structural beams underneath and giving access to the space between the attic floor and the ceiling of the rooms below. The floorboards that were taken out had been carefully set aside, which suggests that the work was done with care to hide any signs of disturbance. The investigation that followed took place in the winter months when there weren't many police officers available in the remote county. 2 days later, Constable Odia Pierce and his deputy, a young man named Jeremiah Walsh, arrived from the county seat in Smethport. They were joined by Dr. Phineas Rothell, a local doctor who was also the region's coroner, when a professional medical examination of a suspicious situation was needed. Dr. Rothell's official report to the county authorities included an examination of the scene. It noted several disturbing discoveries that would baffle investigators for decades to come. His medical training gave him information that was very helpful in figuring out what the brothers did on their last night at the hotel. The doctor noticed that the tools used to take up the floorboards were well planned and showed that the people who used them were skilled in construction or excavation work. Workers found a bunch of things under the disturbed floorboards that were hard to explain right away. Several glass containers with what looked like soil samples from different places in the area were wrapped in cloth that had been oiled. The brothers had been doing a lot of geological surveys in the fall and winter of 1886 and 1887, as shown by the fact that each container was carefully labeled with geographic coordinates and dates going back several months. Dr. Rothell used the simple analytical methods that were available at the time to look at the soil samples. They showed that the compositions were very different from the usual geological formations found in McKean County. Some samples had mineral traces that were linked to deep underground formations, while others showed signs of previous processing or refinement, which made it seem like they had been taken from active or abandoned mining operations. There were also detailed drawings of geological formations, mineral deposits, and what looked like architectural plans for underground chambers next to these specimens. The drawings showed a level of technical skill that went beyond what a casual observer or an amateur geologist would have. The sketches had exact measurements, structural analyses, and notes about load-bearing capacity and excavation needs that showed the person who drew them knew a lot about engineering. It was even more worrying to find a leather journal with entries written in Lysander's unique handwriting. The journal, which was made of high-quality leather and held together with brass fittings, had about 200 pages of detailed notes, calculations, and plans that the brothers wrote down over the course of several months. The last entries, from February 14th and early morning February 15th, talked about what the writer called confirmation of the theoretical framework and accessing the lower chambers through the established entry point. The journal's earlier pages were about the brothers' travels through Pennsylvania's remote areas, where they wrote down what they saw of strange geological formations and abandoned mining operations. In December 1886, entries talked about trips to places in McKean, Potter, and Cameron counties, where they gave detailed evaluations of the mineral potential and how easy it would be to get to them for extraction. The brothers had apparently come up with a systematic way to look at possible sites, taking into account things like the geology, how easy it was to get there by transportation, and how many people lived nearby. The journal's many mentions of the Highland Project and coordination with Philadelphia associates were especially interesting. These entries made it seem like the brothers' work was part of a bigger, more organized effort that involved a lot of people and money. References to shipment schedules and processing arrangements made it clear that any materials taken from the sites would be sent to places outside of the area right away. Constable Pierce's investigation went beyond the hotel itself and looked at the area around it for any signs that the brothers had left. On February 20th, 1887, he sent an official report to the McKean County authorities that mentioned several other strange things that made the case of their disappearance even more mysterious. The constable and his deputy searched the hotel grounds and the nearby forest in a methodical way, looking for footprints, trash, or other clues that might show where the brothers went. It was especially strange that there were no tracks leading away from the hotel through the snow-covered landscape. Fresh snow fell in the early hours of February 15th, which should have kept any footprints made by people leaving the building. However, careful searches of all possible exit routes turned up no such evidence. The snow around the building stayed the same, except for the normal traffic patterns of hotel staff going about their business. During the time in question, other guests at the hotel gave the police more information that made the investigation more difficult. Hartford Bixby, a traveling salesman for a machinery company in Pittsburgh, stayed in room 5 on the 3rd floor. He told Constable Pierce that he heard sounds coming from the attic late at night on February 14th. He said they sounded like rhythmic scraping, with occasional thuds, as if heavy things were being moved across wooden floors. Amos Whitmore, a timber surveyor from Bradford who worked for a logging company, had room 6 and said he saw the same things. His work in construction and excavation made him think that the sounds meant that building materials were being taken out in a systematic way, like floorboards or wall panels. Whitmore said that the sounds followed a pattern that was more like careful, methodical work than random or rushed activity. Both guests said that the noises coming from the attic had been going on and off all night, with times of activity followed by times of silence. The pattern showed that more than one person was working on the project, and they were working together to finish certain tasks in the short amount of time they had available overnight. Local officials searched the nearby wilderness very carefully, paying special attention to the network of old mining shafts and logging trails that crisscrossed the mountains. Constable Pierce organized the search, which included almost 30 volunteers from nearby settlements. It went on for 10 days, even though the weather got worse and made it harder and more dangerous to travel through the forest. Some of the volunteers were experienced woodsmen who knew the area's geography, while others were former miners who knew about the many abandoned mines that were scattered throughout the area. They should have been able to find any signs of the missing brothers as long as they left the hotel in a normal way, because they all had experience in tracking and surviving in the wild.
The long search found no sign of the Ashworth brothers or where they were going. The search teams looked at a lot of empty cabins, mining shafts, and natural caves that could have been used as temporary shelters by people passing through the area in the winter. Several places looked like they had been lived in recently, but none had any proof that could be definitively linked to the missing brothers.
Dr. Rothel's curiosity about the geological specimens found in the hotel's attic led him to contact colleagues at the University of Pennsylvania's Department of Earth Sciences, which led to the investigation expanding. His letter, which was dated February 25, 1887, talked about the strange mineral compositions found in the soil samples and asked for a professional analysis using the university's state-of-the-art lab equipment. In early March, Professor Aldrich Peaton from the university's geology department wrote back, confirming Dr. Rothel's initial findings in a way that was very troubling. The mineral traces in the soil samples are usually found in deep cave systems and underground water sources. This suggests that the brothers were exploring underground areas instead of doing geological surveys on the surface. Professor Peaton's research found several mineral compounds that were not known to exist in the documented geological formations of McKean County. The presence of these materials indicated that the samples were obtained from subterranean sites that intersect various geological strata, potentially via natural cave systems or artificial excavations extending to considerable depths beneath the surface. This find sparked new interest in the area's geological history, and the idea that the Ashworth brothers may have found cave systems or mineral deposits that no one had ever seen before. The landscape of McKean County had many natural caves and old mine shafts. These were left over from Native American settlements and more recent European mining operations that took place in the mid-19th century and mined iron ore and other minerals. Several people who lived nearby said that the Meridian House was built where it is because of underground springs that provided a reliable water source for the hotel's operations. The well in the building, which was drilled during the original construction in 1881, had to deal with several underground streams and needed special methods to make sure there was enough water without letting surface drainage contaminate it. The mystery grew when researchers who looked at the brothers' journal found references to letters sent to colleges and universities in Philadelphia and New York. Letters found in the Academy of Natural Sciences. Archives show that Cornelius Ashworth was looking into reports of strange geological events in Pennsylvania's remote areas. He was especially interested in what he called access points to large underground systems. The letters, which were written between October 1886 and January 1887, showed that Cornelius had been in touch with well-known geological researchers on a regular basis and had been encouraged to keep looking into things by respected academic authorities. Professor Edmund Blackstone of the Academy wrote, "Your reports of subsurface mineral formations in the McKean region are in line with what we know about how the Appalachian region's geology has changed over time. I encourage you to keep up your systematic documentation and send us more samples when you can." Both brothers went to the University of Pennsylvania in the late 1870s. One studied geology and the other studied engineering. Cornelius had written a number of papers on underground water systems for the university's scientific journal. Lysander, on the other hand, had focused on mining engineering and structural analysis of projects that dug up the ground. Their combined knowledge and skills made it seem like they had planned and prepared for their disappearance, which was not the case. University records confirmed the brothers' academic credentials by showing that they did well in advanced classes and worked together on research projects that looked at the link between surface geological features and cave systems below. Their professors had noticed that they were especially interested in how geological knowledge could be used in real life for mining minerals and building things underground. In the spring of 1887, the investigation came to a halt when county officials decided that the brothers had probably gotten lost in the woods and died from exposure or an accident. The official decision was mostly based on the fact that there was no credible evidence of foul play, and the fact that people who weren't used to the area's difficult terrain could have easily gotten lost in the winter. Constable Pierce's files still had the case open, and he continued to get reports of strange things happening near the Meridian House in the months that followed. His personal notebook, which was found among family papers in 1934, shows that he had serious doubts about the official conclusion and thought that the brothers' disappearance involved circumstances that had not been fully looked into. Ezekiel Thorne, the owner of the hotel, said that there were always problems in the attic in the months after the person went missing. Guests said they heard scratching or digging noises coming from the upper floors, mostly at night. Thorne eventually sealed off the attic access with heavy wooden planks because these reports were coming in so often, and he was worried about the building's structural integrity. The sealed attic stayed that way for a few years, but the hotel's reputation suffered as news spread throughout the area about the strange circumstances surrounding the Ashworth brothers' disappearance. Business slowly went down, as many potential guests chose to stay somewhere else instead of at a place where strange things happened. Thorne had to lower prices a lot and take on customers whose backgrounds and intentions were at best questionable. In 1891, a group of investors from Pittsburgh bought the Meridian House. They planned to fix it up and turn it into a hunting lodge for rich sportsmen from cities in the East. A businessman named Aldrich Montrose and the other new owners hired workers to do a lot of work on the building. They modernized the inside, added more dining space, and fixed up the heating system to make it more comfortable for wealthy guests. As part of the renovation, workers opened up the sealed attic to check the roof support's structural integrity and see if the space could be turned into guest rooms. What they found brought back interest in the Ashworth brothers' disappearance and showed that the mystery was much more complicated than anyone had thought. It looks like the digging that started in the eastern wall while the brothers were living there went on even after the official investigation was over. The hole now went several feet into the building's foundation and showed clear signs of work that had been done in a planned way over a long period of time. The excavation showed that the workers were skilled and paid close attention to safety, which suggests that the person who finished the work was very knowledgeable about engineering. Finding more items that weren't there during the first investigation was even more troubling. Several notebooks with detailed notes written in different handwriting were hidden under loose floorboards in places that Constable Pierce didn't search. The notebooks showed that people were systematically exploring underground passages under the hotel. They included hand-drawn maps and drawings of rooms below ground. The notebooks showed that the excavation had broken through the foundation wall, giving access to a natural cave system that ran under the building and connected to underground passages all over the area. The authors wrote about a system of chambers that were all connected to each other. Some of these chambers had signs of previous human habitation that seemed to be older than when Europeans first settled in the area. References to stone arrangements and carved markers suggested that earlier people had used the underground spaces, possibly Native American groups, who used the cave system for shelter or ceremonies. The notebooks had detailed descriptions of artifacts found in different rooms, such as stone tools, broken pottery, and what looked like carefully placed rocks that may have had religious or astronomical purposes.
Montrose told the county sheriff about the find, which led to a new investigation led by Sheriff Isaiah Crenshaw. He took over for Constable Pierce when the constable retired in 1889. Sheriff Crenshaw's investigation of the underground passages showed that they were part of a complicated system of natural caves that linked to several abandoned mine shafts in the hills around them. This made a large network that could be reached from many places on the surface. During the first survey, The investigation team mapped out several hundred feet of underground passages using the right safety gear and lighting for exploring underground. The cave system had several chambers of different sizes that were connected by narrow crawlways and wider galleries. Some of these were naturally formed, while others were changed on purpose to make them easier to get to.
The biggest room, which was about 50 feet below the hotel's foundation, held things that would haunt the area for years to come. The area was almost 60 feet long and 30 feet wide, and in some places the vaulted ceiling rose to 20 feet. Natural limestone formations were enhanced with meticulously constructed stone walls that delineated distinct areas for various activities. The room had what looked like a high-tech underground facility that was made for long-term use and organized operations. The natural cave structure had been turned into several rooms, including sleeping quarters, storage areas for supplies, and a large workspace where geological specimens were sorted and prepared for transport to the surface. There was clear evidence that many people had lived in the underground facility for a long time. There were personal items all over the chambers, which suggested that at least a dozen people had lived there. There was also evidence that the people who lived there had organized their work and divided it up. The complexity of the arrangements showed that a lot of thought and money went into making an underground base of operations that worked. The most disturbing thing was finding personal items belonging to the Ashworth brothers all over the underground chambers. Cornelius's surveying tools were set up on a makeshift table in the main work area. There were also detailed maps of the underground system and geological charts that showed the mineral makeup of different parts of the cave network. Lysander's unique pocket watch, which had a special engraving on it to mark his graduation from the University of Pennsylvania, was among a pile of papers with calculations and geological observations that added to the work he had written about in his journal. The fact that these personal items were there showed that the brothers had been able to get into the underground system and were still working in the underground facility. The papers found in the underground chambers showed how much the brothers were really doing in the area. They weren't just doing simple land speculation or academic geological research. They were doing a systematic survey of underground mineral deposits all over McKean County and nearby areas, focusing on formations that looked like they might hold valuable ore veins and resources that could be used. Their notes said that the cave system under the Meridian House was a central hub for getting to several mining sites in the nearby mountains. The underground network offered hidden transportation routes that let people and equipment move around without being seen by authorities on the surface or by nosy locals. Sheriff Crenshaw's investigation showed that the Ashworth brothers weren't the only ones involved in their illegal activities. Their notes talked about other people who were involved in the survey work, but only by initials and coded names that made it sound like there was a bigger group with strict rules for keeping things safe. The evidence found in the underground facility showed that the survey work had gone far beyond just looking around and writing down what was found. Heavy tools, blasting materials, and ore processing equipment showed that mining was already going on in several places in the cave system. This was done in a systematic way to find and take advantage of the most valuable mineral deposits. The operation was so complicated that it must have had a lot of money behind it and careful planning between all the people involved. The underground chambers had specialized mining tools that would have been hard to get and move to such a remote area. The presence of chemical processing materials suggested that the extracted materials had been refined underground before being sent to facilities in other locations. But the fact that the underground facility was empty made people worry about what had happened to the people who lived there. The quick evacuation made it seem like something had gone wrong with the operation, which meant that the miners had to leave their work and tools behind without having time to properly shut down or recover valuable materials and tools. Several passages showed signs of structural instability, which suggested that the mining operations may have weakened the underground system. This made the chambers unsafe for anyone working there. Partially collapsed areas and unstable rock formations indicated that the extraction work had been performed without sufficient regard for geological safety factors. The investigation grew to include looking at abandoned mining claims and property records all over the area. County records showed that several properties had been bought through middlemen in the months before. The Ashworth brothers arrived at the Meridian House. This suggests that there was a coordinated effort to get mineral rights without drawing attention to the planned operation's size. The buyers had used different business names and lawyers to make deals, but financial records eventually linked many of the purchases to a group of Philadelphia investors who had ties to established mining companies and mineral trading operations. The pattern showed that the McKean County operations were part of a bigger business with a lot of money and the ability to run things well. This discovery linked the missing brothers to a group of people who were involved in speculative mining operations in remote areas of Pennsylvania after the Civil War. The plan seemed to involve systematically finding promising mineral deposits, getting the necessary land rights through middleman deals, and setting up extraction operations using temporary facilities that could be reached through natural cave systems and abandoned mine workings. The revelation explained why the brothers were so interested in the Meridian House and how they seemed to know a lot about how the building was built. The hotel's location made it easy to get to the underground passages while still looking like a real business. The third floor and attic of the building were used to store tools and as a hidden entrance to the excavation site below. Sheriff Crenshaw's investigation went on for several months and grew to include searches of other properties linked to the Philadelphia Investment Group. 3 more sites in McKean County were found to have similar underground operations, all of which showed signs of systematic mineral extraction, followed by quick abandonment of equipment and facilities. The patterns seen at several locations indicated that the entire network had been shut down at the same time, possibly because of a specific threat or event that put the extraction activities at risk of stopping. The fact that the abandonment was planned showed that the organization had good communication systems and backup plans for quickly getting people and important equipment out of the area. The investigation came to a halt because it was difficult to figure out who had jurisdiction over the criminals because they were operating across state lines, and the Philadelphia authorities weren't cooperating. They said that the people involved had left their jurisdiction and couldn't be found for questioning. Local authorities didn't have the resources or authority to take the case to court because there wasn't enough clear evidence of federal crimes that would require federal law enforcement agencies to get involved.
In 1903, a bad spring flood damaged the foundation of the Meridian House, which is now the Mountain View Lodge under new ownership after Montrose went bankrupt in 1898. This brought the case back into the public eye. The floodwaters that got into the basement showed other passages that had not been found in earlier searches. This suggests that the underground system was even bigger than people thought at first. The areas that were now open showed signs of more recent activity, which suggested that the underground operations had continued without anyone knowing after the official investigation ended in the 1890s. Workers discovered modern tools that dated back to the late 1890s and early 1900s, as well as papers that showed that mining operations had started up again with new staff and new organizational structures. There were letters in the documents that were sent to people named Cornelius and Lysander, but the last names were different from the original Ashworth identification. The people who wrote to each other talked about how things were going with getting the Highland operations back up and running, and mentioned problems that had caused them to stop working for a while. The letters hinted that some of the original participants had come back to work under new names.
The discovery brought up important questions about who the missing brothers really were and whether their disappearance was planned as part of a bigger plan to distract people from ongoing criminal activity. The handwriting in the letters was similar to the writing samples found in the brothers' original journals, but the evidence wasn't strong enough to make a positive identification. This new information led to a thorough review of the original investigation records, which showed many mistakes and inconsistencies that had been missed during the first inquiry. When the original investigation was more thorough, it was found that the names the brothers used to register at the hotel could not be found in Philadelphia city directories or university records. Their claimed academic credentials, which at first seemed real, could not be verified by a close look at the University of Pennsylvania's enrollment records, which had been reorganized and digitized over the years. The carefully crafted identities indicated a degree of premeditation and deceit that suggested criminal intent rather than genuine geological research. More research showed that the Meridian House had been the base of operations for illegal mining for almost 20 years, starting not long after it was built in 1881. The building's remote location and innocent look as a small hotel for legitimate travelers made it the perfect place to plan extractive operations across the region without drawing the attention of the authorities. It looked like the Ashworth brothers' supposed disappearance was planned to draw attention away from the ongoing criminal enterprise and let the main players take on new identities and keep doing what they were doing under different organizational structures. The complex lies showed that the people behind it had thought it through very well and knew exactly what police could and couldn't do in remote areas. When investigators found a complex network of underground tunnels linking several mining sites in McKean County and extending into nearby Potter and Cameron counties, they realized how big the illegal operation really was. Over the course of many years, the system was built up slowly. It used natural cave formations and abandoned mine shafts to move equipment and materials that had been taken out of the ground without being seen by surface authorities. Local police eventually found out that the operation was run by a criminal group based in Philadelphia that specialized in illegally mining minerals on public and private land in Pennsylvania and nearby states. To get into promising places, the group used fake identities and front companies. Then they set up secret mining operations that didn't have to follow the rules and pay taxes that real mining companies do. The criminal group ran their business like a real business, keeping detailed financial records and hiring people with real expertise in geology, engineering, and mining operations. The group's success depended on their ability to find valuable mineral deposits that established mining companies had missed, and to get materials using methods that caused little disturbance to the surface and were hard for officials to find. The Ashworth brothers, whose real names were eventually found to be Dmitri and Alexander Klov, worked as advanced scouts for the organization. They found good places to set up extraction operations and built the infrastructure needed for them. Their apparent knowledge of geology and mining engineering made them useful for figuring out where to look for minerals and how to get them out of the ground quickly. The Klov brothers were Latvian immigrants who came to the United States illegally in the 1870s. To support themselves and stay out of trouble with immigration authorities, they got involved in illegal activities. Their time at European technical schools gave them skills that were useful to criminal groups that were involved in complex theft and fraud schemes. Finding out who they really were led to arrests in Philadelphia and the eventual prosecution of several people who were involved in the illegal mining operations. But no one knew what happened to the original Klov brothers. There was proof that they had successfully taken on new identities and were still working for the criminal group under different names and in different places across the American West. A fire in the basement of the McKean County Courthouse in 1908 destroyed most of the remaining evidence, officially ending the case. The Meridian House stayed open as a hotel until 1923, when business dropped off and structural problems continued because of the extensive digging that was going on underground. It had to close for good. For a number of years, the building was empty. In 1951, it was torn down to keep people from getting hurt while exploring the crumbling building. Workers found extra rooms under the building that had not been looked into before during the demolition process. These areas held the most complete proof of the original criminal activities and finally confirmed the size and complexity of the illegal mining business. The personal belongings of several people who had worked in the underground for almost 40 years were hidden in a sealed room. The collection had things that matched what the missing Klov brothers were said to have had, as well as papers that showed what the group did from the 1880s to the early 1920s. Among the things that were found were several journals that kept track of the daily activities of the underground mining operation for many years. The entries, which were written by different people who had worked on different parts of the business, talked about a planned effort to get valuable minerals without being caught by the police or regulatory bodies. The journals showed what happened to people who tried to leave the group or who said they would tell the police about the illegal things that were going on. Several entries talked about fights with workers who had become unreliable or who wanted bigger shares of the profits from the extraction operations. It seems that the organization used fear and violence to keep control of its operations and stop unhappy participants or former employees from exposing the criminal business. The methodical way they got rid of security threats showed how cold-hearted the people in charge of the organization were. The last entries in the journals, which are from 1923, talk about how the group decided to stop doing business in Pennsylvania for good because of more police attention and less profitable mineral deposits that were still available. It looks like the leaders moved to mining areas in Colorado and Montana, where there were fewer rules and more chances to make money by breaking the law. In 1962, the Federal Bureau of Investigation released papers about a long-running investigation into organized crime in the mining industry in the western United States. This was the last time the case was thought to be closed. Some of the materials included photos and fingerprint records that proved the real names of some of the people who worked in Pennsylvania. The federal investigation found that many states had similar illegal mining operations going on for more than 50 years, with hundreds of people involved and millions of dollars in illegal profits made. The criminal mining operations in Pennsylvania served as a model for similar businesses that started up in other places where the geography made it hard for police to catch them, and they had few resources to do so.
The unregulated extraction operations harmed the environment in ways that still affect McKean County's water systems and forest habitats. Chemical processing activities had polluted underground streams and made fish populations in several watersheds go down. The damage done to the environment was a reminder of the long-term costs of illegally using natural resources.